It looks matter-of-fact. It looks easy. The rhythm and balance, the line of direction, the polished ease, the connection to and understanding of a complex environment. Where did that timing come from? How does he know where the cars are? The skills of orientation and mobility are not just something you know because you're blind. Advanced techniques in a high school student often have their start 10 to 15 years before, and the mastery of simple skills builds over the years into complex sets of interrelated skills. There are several basic skills in listening to sounds, learning to separate them into meaningful signals, learning that sounds are cause and effect, that they represent actions, learning to tell where those actions come from, where they are in relation to your body. Echoes take on meaning when a child can feel with his own hands the things that reflect the sounds. Children have to sense and feel, listen and touch, hear and find. Sounds give a description of what's out there. Rhythms and sounds are fun as well as being navigation tools. The rhythms and vibrations, sounds that are both heard and felt with the hands and the body. These too are part of early lessons. Strength, stamina, the development of a dynamic balance when walking. We're learning to use the sense of hearing to fit into action rhythms, to remember patterns, to learn that the duration of distance to a certain area is just about as long as a favorite song. Tucson Unified School District is 228 square miles. The visually impaired program ranges from self-contained classrooms to total inclusion. The full-time mobility instructors in TUSD are itinerant teachers and travel to the students. Getting there is half the fun. We can do an awful lot in our mobility period. While those legs are getting stronger, we can learn about the patterns of sounds and training areas not far from school. Mobility patterns are memorized and internalized even before a child can pronounce them. The rhythm and tone configuration of, "Hey, it's our turn to go now," may long precede oncoming parallel traffic. This is also a time for desensitization to loud sounds. It's a lot easier for mom and dad to take their son into the community with this kind of training. Confidence comes from learning these things from an island of safety in the middle of an ocean of sound. We can capture sounds on a tape recorder. We can collect them and name them and remember where those experiences took place. The sounds of a chain you can't see banging in the wind. We can find where the sounds are and how they're made. Sometimes we're afraid to use the word see with our blind students. There are several ways of seeing and different ways of knowing the world. make this sound with your cane?
Yeah.
Okay, this sound right here?
Yeah.
Let's hear it. Got it, right in front of you. Okay, I'm getting close to this thing. What is this?
Hey, you know what that is? It's a corridor.
Corridor, right in here. That's the gate to the corridor.
Watch out for the duck.
And the corridor has some real different sounds to it, doesn't it?
Don't get on the dirt.
What's this right here?
A rock.
Okay, what's this?
A tree.
Okay, can you find the rock?
Hey, I found it.
You found it, huh?
Don't get on the dirt.
Don't get on the dirt, get on the rock. Okay.
A storm has left traces of its passing in the night. The humidity and sounds and the richness of smells that follow a rain open a world of exploration for a student. The cane is not just an extension of the finger to feel the world. It's a depth gauge and a tool to expand understanding.
1, 2, 3.
Wow, what a splash. You can probably reach over and find it with your cane.
Yeah.
Here's the sound. You see, you grab the cane. Reach over. Come on. It's way over here. You almost got it. You almost got it. It is. Just take one step forward. Reach over. I'm not going to let you fall. Okay. Got you. Slowly. I have it. Move forward and
I got it.
you got it. You got it. Nice job.
Birds.
Okay. What are they doing?
Singing. And eating worms.
Eating worms? Okay, cool.
Sounds can be crazy and funny and absolutely delightful.
Kids are coming.
Just not better. I'm getting back up.
He's coming back up, Jessica.
I wish I was still here, but you could laugh because I'm gonna do a funny thing on you.
Sound has magic to a child. It lives in little boxes and sings. And when it moves, you can learn to understand that movement if, during this movement, you have a way of knowing how it turns and how you can align yourself with it in your own turning. Knowing how close you are, of understanding right where it is, and gradually learning that you can do it.
Boy, I'm going to do something tricky now. Stand right there. Stand right there. Don't move. Point at your cane and radio. Good boy.
Close enough to the wall that you can feel it. You can move away and still sense where it is. There's a language of reflected and absorbed sound. Learning the grammar of this language of sound, how sound waves work in response to changes in form and feature, material and texture, height of ceiling and width of walls. As the teacher of the visually impaired is working on Braille, the mobility teacher is working on the ABCs of sound. Different kinds of touch and bounce responses of a cane, clicking on cement and bopping on grass, not only make different sounds, they feel different too. Countless thousands of experiential, auditory, tactile memories over the years will draw pictures of a world with an immense intricacy and logical connections, an accessible world that can be richly expressed in language. Several times a year, our high school visually impaired students share a lesson with our younger students, peer teaching, and sharing an experience with a friend.
You hold on. This. We're going to go for a wild ride. Head, please, Zoe.
The wild rides taken on mobility lessons are the spice that enlivens the instruction. Opportunities to teach movement concepts are everywhere. They may be so obvious and taken for granted, sighted folks don't even notice them from the visual clutter.
Okay, we're going past an open door. Okay, we're going to go past another open door up yours. It's going to be on your left side. Can you listen? Left side. Okay, on your other side. There you go. We're coming into an open door. There it is. We have a door that's closing up here. Maybe we can get there before it closes. Maybe we can get there before it. A delivery cart is transformed into a wild ride, a rapid-fire change of the sound cues of open doors, the careening turns at hallway intersections where a child feels his body turn, and reads the proprioceptive and kinesthetic cues, the sound cues of the changing heights of ceilings and the open feelings of the outdoor overhangs with their poles. This representation at a higher speed has other things to teach and for the student to learn. A nod of the head from the janitor told us to go for it, and a year later the student still talks about it. He remembers what he learned, and he still laughs. When sound waves encounter an object, they're deflected or blocked. Just as light has reflections and shadows, so too does sound, and sound changes quality as it goes around objects and paints a vivid picture of shapes and forms.
Sneaking around. Up. Here it comes. Here it comes. Gonna get you. All right, coming around the other way.
Oh, you did it.
The shadow. Find it with your cane. Got it. Okay, keep going. More down here. I want you to find it. Listen for the sound shadow. Listen for the sound shadow when you find it with your cane. Good. Okay. Keep on going. Do a sound shadow. I want you to pop it.
At first glance, this scene is visually ambiguous for the viewers of this video, but the student sees the glass door with his ears from its strong reflected sound before we have enough visual clues to construct it visually. The patterns get more complex than just parallel and cross traffic. Cars turn, they accelerate and decelerate in a wide variety of surges and brake noises. We're learning to listen to changes in direction, learning to listen and to name patterns, feeling the representations of those actual turns on the back or the palm of the hand, drawn by a teacher's finger, making the connections of relative position, distance, direction, rate of speed as they happen. Even at this age, although he may be accompanied on his lesson, the student tells the teacher when to go. The layout of lanes and islands, the vast range of variation of pedestrian-operated buttons. If we start early enough, there will be fewer surprises when the students move into independence. Long before a student can even pronounce the word parallel, he knows the cars that are going the same way I am and the cars that are going across my body. We monitor each change in direction by flipping the axis of the white cane to keep track. Oncoming parallel right turns and crossbound left turns, the concepts of where a driver's line of sight will provide safety for a street crossing. This knowledge is years away, but the basics of traffic patterns start in elementary school. By the time the student graduates from high school, he will have internalized traffic patterns and intersections, and he'll be able to read the sounds. Our blind students have training in auditory occlusion, the use of earplugs, both to learn to read low-frequency sounds and to be able to focus on high-frequency sounds when the earplugs are removed. A student contacts the walls here because he's still used to reading the distance from returning high-frequency sounds. With the earplugs inserted, the student's cane contacts the metal door supports. Without the earplugs, he would have walked right through using hearing alone. Focusing on lower frequency sound cues now, and learning to use more of the auditory spectrum, the student doesn't take long to learn to read a different type of auditory information. There's often an astonishment on the part of the students as to how crystal clear the cues are when the earplugs are removed. Sometimes you have to remove something temporarily to call attention to it when it's returned. The lungs, the back, and even the sinuses in the skull are set up to read sound waves and tune in on their direction. This has to be done with structured experience and feedback in the relative position, direction, and movement of sounds. Outside now, the student is using nearby traffic sounds to position himself in a straight line of travel. He's discerning the sound shadows to his right from the thick cement pillars and reflected sound to his left. This balance of low-frequency information gives him a way to maintain a line of travel. It's easier without the earplugs. When the earplugs are removed, the sounds, both moving and static, are richer and clearer. It's almost as if color has been added to a picture. This is a training procedure, and at no time is a student ever placed in a position of danger. Although students use the plugs to listen for returning cars within traffic patterns, it's always done from a corner, an island, or a protected area. A student will not make a street crossing with earplugs or move unattended by a teacher at any time during this training. Learning to read sound and to draw a picture of space with its indentations and extensions is done first by sound, then by touch, hearing, then walking and touching, getting feedback on what was heard. With the earplugs in, this is not only more difficult, but the student has to learn to use a positional auditory memory, a sense of where sounds occurred and their relative position to other sounds. This is a high-order sensory skill, one that few sighted people are even aware exists. We're closer to the traffic now and walking parallel to it. This is practice with low-frequency reflected sound. It takes a while to gauge the distance from walls. Overhead cues are almost impossible to detect. As this student encounters a turn in the sidewalk in an open area, he must use the tactile cues from the cane to make sense of the auditory cues. Here the student must be careful not to overcorrect and veer heavily away from obstacles upon cane contact. Note, too, the delivery cart is a sound generator that draws a picture of an opening. Doors open outwards here, and he keeps his distance. Specific sound cues, experiences, and concepts. Traffic is not always a dangerous obstacle and adversary. It's a critical generator of sounds that draw the forms, features, and patterns of the environment. Using blocked sound, poles this large next to a parking lot give strong cues to their position and shape, and strong reflected sound from the nearby walls. The narrow steel poles are a lot harder to hear, but there's a lawnmower across the street which generates loud background sound and strong sound shadows. There's a lot of poles, and their spacing gives them a strong predictability. The telephone pole ends the sequence, and she can use her other auditory field as she returns. In a city with few sidewalks, we use what we have for landmarks. The ability to read reflected sound from a mailbox is the product of years of auditory training. Not only do we spend years working on increasingly more complex skills, working from gross sound discrimination down to the very fine, we review this constantly over the years, and when there's a landmark that's difficult to detect but crucial to a turn, here on a student's route to her church,
We may do a gross to fine auditory discrimination review in the same lesson. There may be no distinctive markers on the wall or ground, but the height of the ceiling may change. Anything from an awning to an overhang may modify the echoes returning from the ground and give what we call a compression cue. Every stairway has its own set of distinctive markers, clockwise or counterclockwise direction, different proportions of tread and riser, markers of banister, texture, and tread edge. As the areas between the walls widen or narrow, the student is setting up his own sound cues to read the distances and changes of relative width. The boot heels and the cane tip generate the very sounds he reads. What can one expect of a structure? What does it do in a social sense? What part does it play for people? A ramada provides shade and a place for socializing, as well as its use here as a practice area for sound. As important as mobility concepts, sensory skills, and cane techniques are to a blind traveler, we have to remember that we travel among people, with people, to people. The core of mobility is social skills. Tucson is graced with some of the finest resort hotels in the world. The resources of people and the places they go provide the opportunity for our students to create the knowledge of their world. Opportunities abound that offer unique observation posts for learning situations. Pedestrian bridges can provide a unique auditory vantage point to listen to certain patterns of speed, direction, and distance. A bridge over an intersection gives an auditory view of the whole. This feature is an opportunity to discern how wide the street is and to be able to explore it, even as cars are speeding by in their lanes below. Here, the student is using his sense of hearing to find the center of the street in order to explore the timings and patterns of the traffic. Using a finger on the student's back to show the relative position of the cars at the moment they start and finish their turns can draw a fairly accurate sound picture of the traffic. But it's not just what is taught, it's how much the student learns, and there has to be a way to understand if he can really make sense of the sounds in combination with the corresponding relative traffic movement. Feedback has to occur exactly as an action happens to make that sense and those skills understandable and reliable. The danger during the first part of the street crossing is from cars coming from the left, from the middle of the street or the island, from cars coming from the right. The patterns, the timing, the driver's intent, and the focus of the driver's attention, it's all signaled by timing and sound cues. And it's all based on experience the students absolutely need to have during their training. At the far corner, we review our relative position and point out the auditory markers. We do a review and an intermediary check. We talk our way across before we take our first step. A deaf person would be hard put to understand how the student is maintaining a straight line of direction. The landmarks are all auditory. The line is a balance between the engine noises on his left and his parallel traffic on the right. Where is the immediate feedback between the time when the teacher is at the student's shoulder and the time the student is entirely on his own? Let's run this scene again with sound this time and listen carefully at the correction for veer.
Whistle signals are a very brief segment of the training, but they span that critical bridge of time and distance from close supervision to total independence. Students differ in how they're able to conceptualize the complexities of relative distance, direction, and movement. For something as complex as traffic patterns, we start using model cars in the students' hands when they're still in elementary school. We build small situational models at the corners during their instruction. For the higher level conceptualization of intricate traffic and stoplight patterns, the students themselves build the models. What is most important is that they're able to understand not only the parts, but the whole.
Because you have more time, and these guys are marooned out here. They can't make that turn because of all these cars here on the parallel.
In coming to understand the intersection, both from instruction within the car in conjunction with models about where drivers' attention and eyesight is focused, the intersection becomes a system that has a set of strategies, supporting vocabulary, and concepts. Complex indoor routes, often in areas lined with materials that deaden sound, challenge the student to focus on extremely subtle sound cues. Here we practice orientation systems, memory systems, and following a new route from verbal or braille descriptions alone. We know that the road to orientation and mobility skill is a long one, and our students, who may consider a dog guide, must be informed and unbiased. Dog guides work extremely well in semi-rural Tucson, and our students have to know how to make that connection. We send our best to the dog guide schools, and it's our job to make every one of our students our best. For our students going on to our local university or colleges, the senior year is one of increasing orientation to the new routes, public transportation, and challenges that will follow high school. During the summer after high school graduation, our seniors who have chosen dog guides travel to their school and undergo their instruction and return home with their new dogs. There may be a transition to the new routes with the dogs during their first semester at their new schools. Our students know that familiarization and orientation to any route, however long after graduation, is a phone call away. The critical connections here are not route memories, orientation systems, concepts, and sensory skills. The ease with people and the enjoyment of their company is the strongest connection and one of the chief determinants of success. The core of orientation and mobility is social skills. Bias and a sense of limitations are not just the realm of the sighted public. Teachers who work with visually impaired students, too, may have internalized a sense of just how far their students can go and what they can do with their compensatory senses. The invitation to play with electronic slot cars on the racetrack came from the owner of a local hobby shop. We had originally gone in just to show a student a model of the airplanes flying overhead and landing at the local Air Force Base. It was the owner who convinced a skeptical mobility teacher that the student should give it a try. The students had spent considerable time during mobility training in the teacher's car, listening to traffic with windows rolled down, their teacher braking at different speeds, approaching intersections, and the students pacing off the braking distances. The students knew that brakes weren't magical, but here they paid the consequence of speed with an unforgiving wall that slammed and bent their cars on curves they took too fast. They got the feel of braking for tight curves. The acceleration and deceleration noises we'd been working on throughout high school took on new meaning. The mobility teacher, initially wary of his students failing, learned a lot more about things than the students. When the time comes to try something challenging, just say yes.
The planes that constantly circle Tucson and land at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base are a boon to our visually impaired travelers. The low-frequency sounds in the wake of the aircraft draw rich sound pictures of the features and forms in the travel environment. Models are only marginally useful, and verbal description is at a loss to portray the size, the form, and the beauty of these aircraft. The Air Force has been a good neighbor in Tucson for a half-century, and all it took was a phone call to be able to explore things that are so high and so fast, so beautiful to the touch, and so useful to our students who see with their ears. One of the traditions in Tucson is that the red glow-in-the-dark sticker that makes the White Cane street legal is awarded after the first semi-independent street crossing. When the student makes the first decision that it's safe to go, ability and responsibility are recognized. It's a time to acknowledge not only a skill, but an attitude of independence. It's a time for parents and grandparents and for the whole school to take notice. The personal involvement of our principals in Tucson and their caring is one of the core reasons for our mainstreaming successes. For thousands of years, it was the blind people themselves who taught other blind people the skills of dealing successfully with visual impairment. Our high school students have the opportunity to meet and share with our younger students. As our older teens move into the successful roles of young adulthood, our younger students have someone that touches them with an attitude of capability and confidence, and with the sense that they too can succeed. For those who see the world with their ears, the world is the echo of their own voices, beliefs, and attitudes. It's a world that we as their teachers and parents and friends profoundly affect. Our students' goals, their dreams, and their sets of expectations, their assumptions of their ability to overcome their limitations. This is the deep structure of their education. When they're very young, our students who see with their ears hear the words of Helen Keller, herself both blind and deaf. The best and most beautiful things in the world are neither seen with the eyes nor touched with the hands. They are felt with the heart.